It was 2 a.m., and John was working the night shift at the gas station. He had been working there for a few months now, and he had never had any problems. But tonight was different. As John was stocking the shelves with snacks and drinks, he heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like a low growl, or maybe a moan. John walked over to the window and peered outside, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. Suddenly, the door to the gas station burst open, and a figure stumbled inside. It was a man, or at least it had been at one point. His skin was gray and mottled, and his eyes were clouded over. He was covered in dirt and blood, and he smelled like death. John froze in terror as the man stumbled towards him, his arms outstretched. He could see that the man's teeth were sharp and jagged, like a wild animal's. "Help me," the man moaned. "Please, help me." John backed away slowly, his heart racing. He knew he shouldn't get too close to the man, but he also couldn't just leave him there. He reached for the phone to call for help, but the line was dead. As the man got closer, John realized that he was in serious trouble. He grabbed a can of hairspray and a lighter from the shelf and prepared to defend himself. But before he could do anything, the man lunged at him. John screamed as the man sank his teeth into his neck. He could feel his blood draining out of him as the man feasted on his flesh. And as he slipped into darkness, he knew that he would never make it to morning. Megan was driving home from a late-night shift at the hospital when she realized that she was almost out of gas. She pulled into a small gas station on the edge of town and got out to pump her gas. As she was filling up her tank, she noticed a strange man watching her from across the street. He was tall and thin, with long hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing a black hoodie and jeans, and he looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. Megan felt uneasy, but she tried to ignore the man and finished pumping her gas. But when she turned around, she realized that he was standing right behind her. "Can I help you?" she asked nervously. The man didn't say anything. He just stared at her with cold, dead eyes. Megan tried to back away, but the man grabbed her arm and pulled her towards him. She screamed for help. But there was no one around to hear her. Suddenly, the man vanished into thin air, leaving Megan alone in the gas station parking lot. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Had she imagined the whole thing? As she got into her car and drove away, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. She looked in her rearview mirror and saw the man's face staring back at her, even though he wasn't there. Megan never stopped at that gas station again, and she never forgot the terror of that night. It was a quiet night at the gas station, and Cathy was looking forward to getting off work in a few hours. She was reading a book behind the counter when she heard a strange noise coming from the back room. She got up to investigate, but when she tried to open the door to the back room, she realized that it was locked. She didn't remember locking it, and she didn't have the key. Cathy tried to ignore the noise and go back to her book, but it kept getting louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was banging on the door, trying to get out. She decided to call the police, but when she picked up the phone, she heard a strange voice on the other end. "Stay where you are," the voice said. "Don't try to leave." Cathy was terrified. She didn't know who was on the other end of the line, or what they wanted from her. Suddenly, the banging on the door stopped. Cathy heard footsteps coming towards her, and she knew that she was in danger. She looked around for something to defend herself with, but all she could find was a pen. She held it tightly in her hand, ready to fight if she had to. The door to the back room burst open, and a figure stumbled out. It was a man, covered in blood and dirt. He looked like he had been buried alive. Cathy screamed and lunged at him with the pen, but he didn't even flinch. He just kept walking towards her, his eyes fixed in her. In a panic, Cathy ran towards the front door, but she found that it was locked too. She was trapped. The man grabbed her by the hair and pulled her towards him. Cathy could feel his hot breath on her face as he leaned in close. "Please, let me go," she begged. But the man didn't listen. He sank his teeth into her neck, and Cathy felt a searing pain as he ripped her flesh apart. She collapsed to the ground, bleeding and helpless. The man continued to feast on her, his eyes glazed over with hunger. As Cathy took her last breaths, she realized that she would never leave this gas station alive. She was just another victim of the horror that lurked in the darkness of the night. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from a weekend getaway. She had been on the road for hours, and she was exhausted and hungry. She pulled into a gas station on the side of the highway to refuel and grab a snack. As she got out of her car and walked towards the gas station, she noticed that it was eerily quiet. The lights were on, but there were no cars in the parking lot, and she didn't see anyone inside. She shrugged it off and walked inside, hoping to find some food and maybe even a friendly face. But as soon as she entered the gas station, she realized that something was wrong. The shelves were half empty, and the food looked old and stale. The cash register was open, but there was no one behind the counter. And worst of all, she could hear strange noises coming from the back room. Sarah tried to ignore the noises and grab a snack, but the more she looked around, the more frightened she became. She started to feel like she was being watched, like someone or something was lurking in the shadows. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a chilling sound behind her. It was a low growl, like an animal's, but it was coming from something much larger. She turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and lean, with long, shaggy hair and glowing eyes. It looked like a wolf, but it was standing on two legs like a man. Sarah froze in terror as the creature started to move towards her, its eyes fixed on her. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was trapped. The creature lunged at her, and Sarah felt its sharp teeth sink into her flesh. She screamed and fought back, but it was too strong. It dragged her into the back room, and Sarah knew that she was done for. As she took her last breaths, Sarah realized that she had made a fatal mistake. She had trusted the wrong gas station, and now she was paying the price.